All right, good afternoon, everyone, on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Let's put a thumbs up in the chat if you have basketball going on your screen. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Thumbs down if your bracket is already busted. Hopefully there won't be.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't see any. That's great. Well, welcome to this webinar on a Friday afternoon. My name is Linda Wiley, and I am the Director of Online Learning here at ACUHO-I, and I'm excited to be learning with you all on this Friday afternoon. A little bit of a history of where the opportunity came from to host this webinar. For those of you that are joining us today that have the Student Affairs certification, ACUHO-I has a partnership with CIHO to work with CIHO and have CE opportunities at the CIHO conference. And so, in working on reviewing the programs, I came across this gem from Virginia Tech, and we're going to be joined by Dr. Caldwell in just a moment. And in reviewing, I asked her if she would be willing to share this with our broader ACUHO-I audience. And luckily for us, she said yes. So I'm going to turn it over to her in just a minute. A couple of logistical items. We will have the opportunity for some questions. So if you will utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of your webinar screen, that would be great. You can also use the chat. I'll try to monitor both. I am going to go off camera, but feel free to let me know if you do have any questions or issues. This is being recorded and will be shared on our YouTube page next week. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Rebecca Caldwell, who is the Director of Residential Wellbeing at Virginia Tech.
Great. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for spending a couple minutes with me on a Friday afternoon to learn a little bit more about Virginia Tech's residential well-being model. My name is Rebecca Caldwell. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Residential Wellbeing at Virginia Tech. And so during our time together, what I would love to do is tell you a little bit about a model that Virginia Tech has developed over the last 5 years, in which really 6 departments within our Division of Student Affairs have made a commitment to lowering boundaries, using matrix supervision, using a common, to move towards a common vision that we have for our residential campus. And we'll take a look during our time together, both kind of qualitative and quantitative outcomes of what this new residential initiative has done for us, particularly in terms of concepts like flourishing and belonging and loneliness and meaningful experiences across difference for our students. And my hope is that just by listening to this, you might consider some of your own opportunities on your own campus to just move beyond simple collaboration to true integration between departments towards a common aim in order to achieve some substantial change that's meaningful to you and your campus. And so I am coming to you live this afternoon from beautiful Southwest Virginia. And so kind of in keeping with the values of ACUHO-I and CIHO, just wanted to share at both our land and labor acknowledgement for Virginia Tech here down in Blacksburg. We live and work on the homeland of the Tulo-Monacan people. We recognize their relationship with lands and waterways, and we acknowledge that legislation and practices like the Morrill Land Grant College Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands, both locally and in Western states and territories. And similarly, when we think about the labor that built these spaces, we acknowledge that our Blacksburg campus sits partially on land that was previously the site of the Smithfield and Solitude plantations that were owned by members of the Preston family, and that between 1770 and 1860, the Prestons and other local white families that owned parcels of what became Virginia Tech also owned hundreds of enslaved people. And then enslaved Black people generated resources that financed our predecessor institution, the Preston and Olin Institute, and that enslaved Black labor worked on the construction of its buildings. And so as we look towards the future, we want to own, where we sit and where we came from and why that's meaningful in terms of our future. So Virginia Tech had a moment right after the pandemic where they sat and they looked at what was going on with their students, and what they saw based on both kind of their kind of literal experiencing of their students, but maybe more importantly, the data they were collecting on their students painted a picture for them that concerned them greatly. They were concerned about their students' well-being. And so using tools like the Healthy Mind Study, like the National College Health Assessment, they found that two-thirds of their students reported that they were not flourishing. Over half reported feelings that meant that they were lonely. Um, over 30% did not feel a sense of belonging on our campus, and that all of those measures and many more were even more, there was an even greater risk or even greater concerns for our students from marginalized populations, especially related to mental health concerns. And so many of us, I think, were in a hard place after the pandemic. Although I think for Virginia Tech, they also were realizing that it just for maybe a little while, even before then, had been feeling like the experience that they were providing and the needs that they were seeing among their residential students didn't feel like they were matching up. And they made a really kind of bold step to say, what if we just set aside what we're doing in terms of what they currently called at that time called residential life, and instead said, what if we just put that aside and rebuilt something from the ground up? And said, if we, based on what we want for students, based on their mental health concerns that we were all being overwhelmed with at that time in the country, based on the fact that we found that their sense of belonging was way lower than we wanted it to be. Their sense of loneliness was way too high. What would it look like if we redesigned this from the ground up? And that's where their residential well-being model was developed. And so Virginia Tech is a large residential campus. We are one of Virginia's two land grant institutions. We have over close to 40,000 students, over 39,000 students between our different campuses, and over 10,500 beds on our campus here in Blacksburg, set up in a traditional way at that time. And we said, what if we stepped away from this idea of staffing ourselves and revolving ourselves around this idea of this staff supports this building, and instead said, let's go ahead and chunk together sets of buildings in a way that is focused more on what we think a set of students needs, and instead reorganize ourselves in that fashion. And we wanted to move away from something that we might have drifted towards, which is kind of the life of the campus happening out on both the academic and co-curricular side of the campus, and then the residential campus being kind of where students came to kind of sleep and watch Netflix and things like that, and instead made the residential spaces a space where our programs were inescapable, where you almost had to opt out rather than opt in to the types of really important services that we had dedicated ourselves to. Virginia Tech's uniquely, I think, dedicated in our mindset to the Hokie experience, what we want the extracurricular or co-curricular experience to look like, what we want holistic well-being to look like, the mental health supports that we have in place. What if these things were truly integrated inside of every element of what our residential experience looked like, so that it became deeply porous, so that the difference between those services and what was happening inside the residence hall, could we make it as indistinguishable as possible? And that was one of the main goals of that model as well. And so when everything was said and done, after about an 18-month experience of studying ourselves and thinking about what we would want this to look like, they set down residential life and they built a model that worked for their students of today. And we call that model residential well-being. And what it really is a matrixed approach built amongst around 6 different student affairs departments. And so that includes our Dean of Students office, and most particularly the elements of case management that they do for students, Cook Counseling, which is our counseling center, our Hokie Wellness Department, which is a comprehensive student, faculty, and staff well-being program, and our student engagement and campus life area. At the time that we built residential well-being, I do wanted to let you know the sixth kind of arm of that was really our identified diversity, inclusion, and belonging section of the Division of Student Affairs. So we did have a chief inclusion and belonging officer at that time. That was a significant section of the model. We have evolved that kind of in the current landscape to refocus a little bit more on belonging and community well-being. But our top 3 divisional priorities, if you pull out VT's Division of Student Affairs strategic plan, you will find our top 3 priorities are student success and holistic well-being, Experience VT, which is our language for meaningful involvement, and inclusive environments for students. And so we organized the entire programmatic side of our new residential well-being model to match our division's top 3 strategic priorities. And we thought about what are the outcomes that we're looking for. And we narrowed in on 3 very specific outcomes. And we wanted those outcomes to be increased sense of belonging, decreased loneliness amongst our students, and increased kind of holistic flourishing. So increased kind of holistic wellness amongst our students. We do use the concepts of flourishing to identify that for ourselves. And so all of these departments are working together in this matrix model that I'm going to explain to really try to improve these outcomes for our students who live in residence, which ultimately becomes with very much an eye towards the fact that we believe that that would spread out and over 4 years and beyond become the experience of all of VT students on the Blacksburg campus. The residential well-being model is deeply focused in kind of public health principles. And so, interestingly, when we created the residential well-being kind of space, we also moved it under our AVP for health and well-being. And so my direct report as the director of residential well-being is to the senior director of Hokie Wellness. And together we are part of the portfolio of our AVP for health and well-being. And so what does this specifically look like? We had, like I mentioned, we have 10,500 beds on this campus. It's a very large residential population. And we knew we wanted to focus in on these very specific focus areas. And so we thought a way to do that would be to create teams that support segments of our campus population. So we took our 10,500 beds, we divided it into 5 districts of about 2,000 people each. And each of those districts is supported by a team that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. A district is led by a managing director. And so that really, I call them the air traffic controllers. They are the leader who works in partnership with all of the co-supervisors from the other partner departments in order to supervise this whole team of professionals and student staff who are focused on our priority areas. Every district has 1 or 2 professional case managers. And so they are non-clinical case managers who are part of both residential well-being and our Dean of Students office. I'm going to describe each position a little bit more in depth in a minute. Each district has a coordinator for Experience VT, so they're focused on meaningful engagement and involvement. They have a coordinator for well-being, who are in essence health educators. They're members of Hokie Wellness and residential well-being. They have a coordinator for belonging and community well-being. So first couple of years we called that inclusion and belonging. Now we're really focused in on the skill set and how to know who am I and who am I in relationship to other people. And then we have, as part of the model, 5 embedded counselors. And so there's 1 for each district. They actually do work a little bit more as a team. That was an early kind of evolution. Our 5 embedded counselors are full members of our Cook counseling team. And so they have really important relationships to us. They provide direct services to residential students. They actually act as our primary trainers and mental health experts for our team, which gives us lots of cohesion and common language. And they work on the residential campus. They work a unique schedule. They work from 2 in the afternoon to 11 in the evening, Monday through Thursday. They work a traditional day on Friday. And they are, every time they're open, offering walk-in services for residential students. So a residential student can come directly to our embedded counselor program and be seen. Our team can walk folks directly to the embedded counselors when the embedded counselors are open, which gives us a tremendous amount of open access. And then they do run groups, they do see clients individually through our embedded counselor suite, and they offer a lot of psychoeducation as well. And so they're very much a very lively and important part of the residential well-being model. They're a huge part of the success of why this model has worked for this campus. And so there is that fivesome that are part of the residential well-being model, and they often each are a liaison to one of the districts in particular. Once we developed those professional staff teams, we also thought about those three main strategic values, and we thought about how that could play out with the student population, our student leader population. So, like many campuses, we had a traditional resident assistant model, and we took that model and we morphed it. We changed it up to match this new model. And so sometimes people will say, well, do you have RAs in residential well-being? I'll say, we have something very similar. We have a version of that, and we call them residential well-being student leaders. And one of the most important ways that they're just a little different than the model we had before is they too specialize. So instead of asking the resident assistant here at VT to be kind of everything to everybody, to ask them to know every kind of possible uh, topic that could matter to their residents, we actually have them specialize. So they are hired to either be a student leader for belonging, a student leader for experience VT, or a student leader for well-being. They we pick students who have a special interest in either involvement, or well-being. And as part of their training, they spend a tremendous amount of time with their what we call their content area in their specialty area, so that they themselves are kind of a little student particular resource on things like holistic well-being. And they work together with each other. So the typical first-year student here at Virginia Tech doesn't just have a single RA figure. They have three student leaders, one of each type. And so they work together, and instead of supporting maybe just kind of one RA to 35 to 50 students, we have three student leaders who support 120 to 150 students together, one of each type. And they work together in what we call a triad model, again, to focus in our three divisional priorities. And I'll talk a little bit more about them as we go as well. And maybe one of the most important things to understand about RWB is this is a deeply matrix model. And so how does all of this work? It works because almost every person in this organization exists in two departments. And so just our young professional staff or our professional coordinator level staff, they are a member of residential well-being, and they're a member of their partner department. They're part of their district team, and they're part of the team of other people who also do their same job. So they might be members of both District 3 and a member of the Coordinator for Wellbeing team. And they have two sets of teams they work together with, and each of those coordinators who are part of those two teams, they supervise the student leaders who also do that same work in their functional area. And so a little bit more about these professional positions. And if you want to see copies of these PDs, send me a note. I'm happy to provide them. But I mentioned our case managers, members of also our Dean of Students office. They spend about 60% of their time doing direct individual support to students. And so they are not clinicians on purpose. They are often come from backgrounds like community service boards, social work, things like that. And they provide provide instrumental support to students. And so their most common clients are students who have expressed some kind of mental health concern. So let's say they turn up overnight as a speaking to their student leader about a mental health concern that they have. It's common that a case manager is at their door in the next day or two, doing a door knock, introducing themselves, saying, "Hey, I'm aware of kind of what's going on. How can I make sure you have all the right resources?" They also often are who works with our more complex cases. So if a student has something going on with academics and finances and family things going on, that's the kind of student that we're going to connect with their district's case manager to make sure that we're bringing all the right resources to bear. And we will pick up that student and kind of keep them until we feel like they are kind of in a place that they've kind of got this for themselves, and they're going to keep going, and then maybe just touch base as they need us. And so case managers probably spend about 60% of their time doing that, and about 40% of their time just on really traditional residential duties. When everything is said and done, residence halls still need to be opened. They still need to be closed. We do still have a pretty traditional duty structure. Our professional staff, our students, professional and leadership staff, run a multi-level call system. And so they are all of our professional staff participate in that. So that's probably the other 40% of their position. Our coordinators for well-being are in essence health educators, right? So they also report to an associate or assistant director in our Hokie Wellness department. They think together with their colleagues and based on what we notice about what are some of the well-being needs for their district. They help our students offer programs that meet those needs. They actually work together with all the well-being departments, and so they've got a connection to Hokie Wellness and our health center and our rec sports department and the outreach parts of our counseling center. And together, they are just kind of making sure that those departments are able to get their kind of core message and resource into our students. They spend about 20% of their time supervising the student leaders in their district who also do that job, who are the student leaders for well-being. And in any district, that's usually about 15 to 18 student leaders. And again, they spend about 40% of their time on pretty traditional residential duties that most of us are familiar with. Our experienced VT coordinators are also part of student engagement and campus life. And so they focus on helping to deliver our model for kind of experienced VT for residential students, which for us is focused on transitions, traditions, strengths. VT is a big Clifton Strengths campus, and just making VT personal to them. How do you find your way in this very large, complex, well-resourced institution and figure out kind of where you belong, especially in your first and second semester. And so that is what our experienced VT coordinators are focused on. They are leading the student leaders for experienced VT and, of course, doing residential duties. And then our coordinators for inclusion, for belonging, community well-being, you can hear me using the old language. We had already established a position inside Hokie Wellness that was going to be focused on inclusive well-being, even as it worked hand in hand with some of the structures that are not necessarily in place anymore at this time. But that position we did remain in place, and they work hand in hand with these folks to think about identity exploration, promoting concepts of pluralism, promotion of just belonging support systems, helping people find, where they belong on campus, and just again following up on individual student needs. All of our all of our professional staff can be assigned very specific students who may have a concern that kind of matches their expertise area in order to provide a really kind of unapologetically hands-on, high-touch approach to our residential students. Again, they also supervise student leaders and do kind of do residential duties as well. Um, One of the most important elements of the model that makes all of these people that I'm talking about work is our managing director role. So not too different if you're from a residential life background. It's not too different than the area director concept in that they have this span of buildings, but they're working together with this specialized team to meet the needs of the communities that they serve. And so they're in there co-supervising. There are four types of supervisees. That's an act of almost constant communication with their four kind of co-supervisors and working hand in hand with co-supervisors so that our goal is ultimately for our coordinators who are part of two departments to feel like that is value added, to feel like that is something that is as seamless as possible. And we also know that we're failing when they feel like they have two jobs for two different people. And so managing directors and their co-supervisors are not only trying to kind of supervise those professional staff, but try to make sure that it is shored up in a way that we create as seamless an experience as possible for the professional staff that then rolls down to that student leader staff, which rolls down to the residents themselves. Our managing directors, they ride herd on kind of all cases that come into their district. We push the product Maxient to its absolute limits. We use it as a comprehensive system for kind of all student issues. And so whether it's professional staff or student staff, when students come to them with concerns that lie anywhere in our wheelhouse, anything from a well-being concern to questions about adaptation to conduct concerns to mental health concerns, all of those cases are coming into our Maxient system, and managing directors receives all of the cases for their district. And so they work together with their team to figure out who belongs to this, who's best positioned to serve this case. Unsurprisingly, the most amount of cases you'll ever have in your queue is on Monday morning. So every district starts their week with a Monday morning huddle. And they talk about everything that's come in the last 72 hours in particular. They work their way through kind of what cases belong with what individuals, what collateral students need follow-up within this kind of really high-touch mindset. We're not only thinking about maybe the identified student who, for instance, turned up on our radar screen with an alcohol overdose or with a significant kind of mental health concern, but what other residents saw that? Who else needs a little bit of a high-touch follow-up to make sure that they are also okay, that they don't need additional resources? And so managing directors are the ones who make sure that kind of folks get assigned to someone who's going to follow up with them. And we do use a version of NVIDIA's case management kind of risk matrix to really identify not only kind of where someone belongs, but the exact pace of door knocks and emails and phone calls and follow-ups that need to be matched to the level of concern that the student's case kind of turned up with on our doorstep. Um, our managing directors, together with our senior student leaders, also kind of supervise the dynamics of our triads. We talked a little bit about the student leaders and the fact that we have overwhelmingly them kind of triangled up in order to serve a set of students, and we want them to, as a triad, provide a steady flow of programs to their residents. So there's this kind of ongoing a kind of stream or flow of programs along our three main kind of functional areas. And we also want to make sure that all of the students in that group are known. And so managing directors and senior students leaders work together to supervise triads to make sure they have healthy dynamics and that they're getting that job done. They monitor the trends of their districts and the dynamics of their districts. VT is also a school that is really committed to living learning programs. And so we have about 25 either residential colleges or living learning communities. And so a managing director is not only kind of paying attention to who might naturally have sorted themselves into certain buildings, but also, we may have a building that has 500 engineers in it because all of those engineers are in this very comprehensive engineering living learning program. And so naturally, they have unique needs that our district team might slightly kind of alter what we deliver and what we notice and what we respond to based on the living learning programs that all kind of exist inside of our residential districts. Our managing directors also make sure all of our traditional life cycle stuff happens, and they themselves, I think, are absolutely key in making sure that we don't kind of drift off of the intention and and the fidelity that we need to stay on course with this model that the university is kind of so carefully designed. A couple of other structural changes, especially for folks who are listening from the residential lens, that might also help you make sense of how kind of VT pulled this off. I mentioned the five embedded counselors, and so they live on. In retrospect, that's not necessarily true. I think you just need five committed professionals who are willing to kind of work these hours. Although if people are wondering, hey, how did you find folks who are willing to do this work? Our main hook has been that the leader of that area is a licensed clinical supervisor, and we overwhelmingly tend to hire brand new social workers, and so they have a good opportunity to, through coming and working as part of the residential well-being model for a few years, they're well positioned to be licensed, and the opportunity to leap therefore into kind of the rest of our operation, or be very well positioned to kind of start a career as a licensed person who wants to work with college students. You can hear we have probably you might be able to hear that we've stripped away some of the traditional facilities-based duties that our residential team would have naturally done, and so we responded to that change, that to make that space for the professional staff by standing up some 24/7 housing services phone response. We call it ResX internally. We have a ResX desk that really helps us be much more efficient in getting our facilities and housing operations side the right information in the right time. Our housing services staff really has taken on room assignments, room change, all contract-based issues. We do still help with things like roommate mediations. We needed the labor for health and safety, so we still do some of that kind of stuff. We still help work hand in hand with them on opening and closing, but we did structurally make space for all of these professional staff to really have collateral positions, to be matrixed into multiple departments, and by moving some things out over into our facilities and operations side. And then probably the last really important structural change, it actually took us about a year to get there, but it's probably one of the most important structural changes we made was to our senior student leader role. So we had a senior RA role. I think we weren't sure in year one what we were doing with it. And what we realized was that our senior student leaders could step up in a couple of really important ways. One is that they do help, like I mentioned earlier, co-supervise our triad dynamics. And so triads need to be functional teams. And so our senior student leaders have supervision meetings with triads together to make sure that they're on task, on goal, and to have positive, healthy dynamics. And they also joined us in our on-call line. And so we have a first line of call in the evenings and on the weekends that is senior student leaders. Lots of the simple questions that student leaders have, especially new student leaders have, go first to our senior student leaders on call. And so it was a model we adapted from some other folks. I'm not sure I was totally sure if it was going to work when we first started, and boy, it's exceeded our expectation many-fold over. And so we actually have found, when everything's said and done, that by adding a first line of call with senior student leaders, it's drawn off about 50% of the calls that went to coordinators on call. And so in the development of this model, one of the things that we intentionally did was we hired people from all kinds of backgrounds. And so we have a number of folks who are part of our team who have come up through pretty traditional residential life backgrounds, and as many, if not more, folks from other backgrounds. And so we have found folks from K-12 are a really good match for the model, folks from community service boards, folks from other parts of student affairs who are very interested in this kind of high-touch care and concern model that we're espousing. And so we actually unhooked Live On as a requirement for our coordinators. And so we end up having about half of the coordinator staff still living with us in on-campus apartments, and about half don't. And that's allowed us to hire hire folks who have families who are local. It's allowed us to retain folks who still love the job, but we're kind of done living in a residential environment. And so these folks from all kinds of backgrounds sometimes call was a little bit of shock and awe. And we do a lot more talking with candidates about it. And still sometimes people are like, oh, I didn't know how on-call was going to affect me. But adding the senior student leaders to the on-call line really had a tremendously positive impact for us on their longevity and the burnout level and really the experience of the professional staff on call. And so it was been a huge fit for us and a big success in the model that wasn't there on day one, but is absolutely central to the things that have worked for us about it. A little bit more about student leaders versus the RA model. I think I've probably covered most of this. Instead of a single RA to their contiguous folks, instead you've got 3 contiguous folks with up to 150 students. It generally ends up being 120 is actually probably the average that a triad supports just based on the geography. Like many other folks, we have buildings of many sizes from 90 to 1190. So we get different sized triads, but 120 is about our average. They serve as both members of their district, and then they also meet with everyone else who does their job. So our student leaders for their weekly staff meetings, one week they'll be with their district. The next week they'll be with everybody else who does their job. They'll be with all of the other student leaders and coordinators who are in their content area. They might then bounce back to their district, and then once a month we also do an in-service for everybody who is part of the team. And so they get, just like their coordinators, they too exist in 2 teams and have the opportunity to be supported in 2 ways. And we really have helped them refocus their position as one of care and concern. And so we really, in every choice we made, from the new name of the position itself to how we talk about their time around in the evenings. We don't use the word duty rounds anymore. We use instead a concept called community walks. We have fewer of them, but it's an expectation that our student leaders, when they are on duty, are spending time in community, that they would spend anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes on a community walk in common spaces, in conversation with students. If people are playing a game or watching something in a lounge when they come by, that they would sit down and take a few minutes and just hang out with folks. The expectation is they're talking with folks about what's going on, and that's what they report back to us. They write to us each night in a community walk log about who did you talk to? What kind of things were going on? What were people out and about doing? What conversations did you have? Is there anybody who you had a conversation with that you think could use some follow-up? Did you talk with someone who said, I joined a couple of orgs at first. None of them have felt great. I really feel like I haven't found my space here yet. Who is that? Can we send a coordinator for Experience VT just to kind of follow up on that conversation and see if we can get them connected in finding their place here on campus. And so a really different mindset, which over time has paid off for us tremendously. Having the right people, then recruit the next right people. And after just really a cycle or 2, we found that the folks who really want to see that role of being the live-in upperclassmen as one of expressing a tremendous amount of care and concern to their peers, those are the folks that are applying now, and they take our philosophy through everything that they do. Unsurprisingly, for the interest of time, I'll leave this kind of up here for just a second, but just like the professional staff, those student leaders do specialize in their areas. And so, for instance, a student leader for well-being, they do programs that promote the well-being areas. They use some box programs that have evidence-based, health information in them, and they have creative ways that they will attach that health information. Our Experience VT student leaders very focused on helping people find their way, helping them feel very connected to large campus programming. So they might, for instance, have an opportunity for a VIP experience. And so our student engagement and campus life folks might create participate. It might be that hundreds of students want to come to a Bob Ross paint night, but several student leaders have been able to get a VIP experience where their students get there 15 minutes ahead of everybody else, or they get a special swag bag related to a big campus-wide event. Just start to make those connections between residential involvement and the involvement we hope that they will have long-term across their experience. And our belonging student leaders, very focused on who am I? Who am I in relationship to other people? How can I bring all of myself to the residential campus and get to know all of other people? And so for tech, this model has worked very, very well for them. The some of the things that have been the most successful, first and foremost, is that commitment to strong wraparound care for students who come onto our radar screen. You can hear we tried to do all kinds of changes all at once. It was it with all kinds of varying degrees of success, but I said really early on, if we could only get one thing right in year one, it's got to be care and concern. And so we dug in really hard to what is the role of case management? What is the role of the embedded counselors? How do we teach these 260 student leaders to see their role as expressing care and concern to their residents rather than a role that is based on things like compliance? Right. And so that style of committing to ourselves had immediate payoffs for us. It changed overnight for our team, changed overnight for the campus police. It has led to some significant reductions in things like involuntary hospitalizations off of our campus. That piece of the puzzle it worked early and it has continued to work. And that payoff in and of itself was probably worth the price of admission, right? Especially considering where we were in 2022 and what has continued to be the concerns that our students bring to us. Using a public health framework, looking at everything through that public health lens has been tremendously helpful for us. When we see and try to attack a wicked problem, a problem like vandalism, a problem like poor peer-based behavior, we sit back and we think a little bit about how can we see this as a public health issue and how can we address this all along kind of the concepts, especially the concept of the social ecological framework. So, for instance, something that we inherited were not unlike anybody else, some behaviors that were considered to be okay in the residential environment, buildings that were considered to be perfectly fine to trash or to treat really poorly. And we said, what are all the levers we could pull along the social ecological framework to try to make a difference? Everything from access to policy to enforcement to normative beliefs about what is or isn't okay to individual kind of experiences that people have in the hall. And we pulled a whole series of levers, particularly between year one and year two. And we found that very, very quickly, by using that kind of approach and those kinds of levers, we were able to completely change how those residential spaces looked and felt. And very quickly by using different styles of interventions that kind of linked it and built on each other from that public health framework. Some other things that have been successful, completely revisioning kind of the opening experience for us. That had become deeply transactional, unsurprisingly, kind of in the post-COVID environment. And so we thought about just kind of like, how do we make sure that every student is being introduced to the resources and the experience of this model and the community expectation of this model from the first night they are here. So we use a waterfall approach to how people arrive on campus so that your first and second night, you are with your residential well-being student leaders, learning about our approach, learning about our values, learning about how this environment is going to support you as an individual. And almost right away, we found huge changes in the amount of community we were able to build early, who came out to programs, doors being opened, things like that. And so that was an early success for us as well. We have found that with this model, the student leader role is a trusted resource for students. We kind of teach student leaders that conduct violations are incidental findings. Of course, while you're out building community, while you're out taking care of people, we're going to come across conduct violations, and we're going to send those to our partners in the Office of Student Conduct, and they are one of our matrixed partners. We have a shared kind of leadership position between our two departments that kind of help us make sure we kind of stay on track with that. But when we said, our purpose is care and concern, this is our primary model. We found that students come to student leaders for all kinds of things, sometimes more than we want them to. And so that we were able to turn that tide really quickly for us internally and externally. The student leader position is highly sought after. We've 800 applications on average for sometimes as little as 75 openings because we also have really high retention year to year with that student leader role. So that was an early fear. Have people bought into this model? Have these folks, especially who came over from one model to the other, have they bought in? Do they believe in it? And what they told us was that this job's harder. It was harder than the job they had before, but they really felt confident that it made a difference to their residents. And we found early gains in the metrics we care about, which I'm going to share in a second: belonging, loneliness, cross-cultural communication, and student engagement. So to make sure we get to that. Things that have continued to be challenging. It is high touch. High touch takes a lot of time. And what we found every year, we challenge ourselves to think about, is this process we're just going through as student-centered and as high touch as it could be? And so we relooked at things like what happened when people got financially disenrolled? What happened when someone got internally suspended? What other How do we make sure that everything that happens inside the residence hall is reflective of this philosophy and approach? We it took a lot of time in the first couple of years to just keep going at it, and to say, yes, this is time consuming, and yes, we are confident this is what we are supposed to be spending our time doing. In the early years, we found that role clarification was really important. It raised itself as a challenge each of the first, particularly 3 years, helping understand how one student leader position is different than another, how one coordinator position is different than another, making sure that they had pretty distinct lines while also being able to express their duties in kind of similar ways. And so we have a great set of content experts right now who've really committed themselves to some common language, some common expectations. So we had a lot less looking over the fence at the other positions, trying to decide which student leader job is the hardest and which one's the easiest. And so that took some dedicated time. I would tell anybody, you got to spend a little energy on that. We did find that early on we didn't know that the content areas needed to put up some dedicated professionals, but just like we have dedicated coordinators and dedicated managing directors, our content areas also needed to have dedicated positions that are anywhere from 50 to 100% dedicated to their part in supervising their element of the model. I talked a little bit earlier about some of the challenges for the multi-generational, multi-background team. It serves us in spades. They ask excellent questions. And there are certain things about it that are hard. And so we've over time learned about that. We've continued to try to need to morph the model for special populations that exist on our campus. So a little bit about the outcomes themselves. And so we do a residential survey about 6 weeks after the start of every semester. We're also getting into the groove of a spring survey as well, which will let us get a little bit of beginning of the year, end of the year data. But I'm going to show you a little bit about some of our fall data for the last 4 years and how it compares to that pre-RWB data that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And so just a few notes, our top departmental goals are increasing belonging, decreasing loneliness, increasing flourishing. And we do, as a kind of through that public health mindset, think a lot about what are some of the validated measures that we use as a field to get at what are some of these concepts, and measuring that allows us to measure ourselves year over year and compare ourselves to national pools, which you'll see in a second. And so I mentioned we do a 6-week survey. Students are deeply generous to us. We've ranged anywhere from 16 to 23% of the residential students will take the survey. Open it the Sunday night after fall break. It is a top time the student will take a moment and do your survey, and they've been really generous to us when we do put this out. So let's talk a little bit about loneliness first. Since before the models, I shared a little bit about some 2021 data. We've seen some really significant reductions for us. And so that was about 55% of students screened positive for loneliness in 2021 before we implemented the model. The last 2 years, that's been at 39%. And so still plenty of space to go, but we've seen about a 16% reduction from prior to the model. We also do look at ourselves against national pools. And so in this case, we're looking at Healthy Minds kind of published national data. And we again see about a 13% lower um, endorsement than for amongst our students than among national populations. And then we also really interestingly last year polled an off-campus set of data as well. And so we wanted to know, I think we were starting to think a little bit about what do the post RWB students look like, but just looking at off-campus students versus on-campus students, we found our off-campus students were endorsing loneliness at a much higher rate than our residential students. Thinking about belonging, I think we've been playing a lot with as a divisional leadership team on what are we measuring when we say we're measuring belonging. What an early thing is just kind of like, hey, you know what? We just simply ask students, do you feel like you belong at Virginia Tech? And so we have seen increases of in that since before the model. You know, less than 70% before the model, over 80% the last time we asked the question, and that was higher than the national average. The last couple of years, we're starting to lean a little bit more into some other questions. And so we've pulled some questions that are also asked on NESSE. I feel comfortable being myself on this campus. 88% of our students this fall said yes to that. I feel like I'm part of the campus community at Virginia Tech. 93% of our residential students said yes to that. Both of those are higher than national averages. And then we have some stuff that we're just kind of asking ourselves, like I have at least one close friend at Tech, or I over 9 out of 10 of our students are saying yes to that, and that also that they feel like faculty and staff care about them. And so we think all of those things kind of lead in to elements of belonging. And then in terms of flourishing itself, which we're kind of been playing with as a division as kind of a meta outcome. And so we have seen from before the model a significant increase. We bounced up really high those first 2 years to almost 60% of our students saying that they're flourishing. The last 2 years hanging out at just over half. But again, that is higher than the national average. We also found that our off-campus students did not endorse that as the same rate as our on-campus students. And then kind of lastly, the other thing that's been on our mind when we stood up things like those embedded counselors is, are we confident the model is part of reducing barriers to seeking help? And so we do find that our students will overwhelmingly tell us they're confident they could find a resource if they needed help. As a tech student, our embedded counselor program has been heavily utilized. Each year it has grown. Last year, for instance, over almost 400 students used the embedded counselors. And this is, of course, in addition to a really robust commitment to a very traditional, we have an 8 to 5 brick and mortar counseling center that is well resourced. And we also do use Timely Care is our telehealth, mental health a service that complements our in-person services on campus. But still over almost 400 students used our embedded counselors, and they conducted over 1,800 sessions through that team, through that embedded counselor residential program. And like I mentioned earlier, probably one of the outcomes we're particularly proud of is just the totality of that, the work of our counseling center, of our police, of our new residential model. We have found that our hospitalizations off of the residential campus were cut in half in the first 3 years of the model. And so kind of one last thing, and then we'll see if there's a few minutes for questions. This is a big transition. This is the idea of, I think tech can be a really bold place. They're willing to set things down and rebuild them from the ground up to try things really different. And that meant that suddenly what had been a pretty traditional program suddenly became a matrix of multiple departments. And so if you're thinking about transitions like that, some of the most important things are to really very much stay in a growth mindset, be willing to have your department relationships be porous. And so we intentionally lower boundaries between our departments. I am very able to see kind of a student's kind of history of communicating with my department, with the dean of students office. I can see what's happening with them in conduct. I can see how we supported them in engagement and involvement. We are really able to work very porously in a way that I'm confident serves our students. I mean, it also means we have to be really generous with each other, right? So we said, all right, we're going to have residential programming. We invited a bunch of experts in their content area to contribute to residential programming who didn't particularly have a ton of experience in residential programming, right? And so it meant that we had both sides had to share a lot of patience with each other, had to show a lot of generosity towards each other with a growth mindset that we ultimately believed that we would land someplace better than where we had been in terms of meeting the needs of the students that go to Virginia Tech now. And we did find through that kind of generosity and that porousness that we are really confident that that's happening for us. You need to be really, really comfortable with ambiguity. We use a lot of really kind of that rapid feedback and improvement kind of cycling that you sometimes see kind of in public health backgrounds. We will let something we will try all kinds of things. Something that the thing that most attracted me to this role the day that I interviewed is people said, we're going to throw a whole bunch of stuff against the wall and some of it's going to stick and a bunch of it's going to fail. And I was like, I'm here for this. And we use kind of rapid feedback loops in order to try new things, but also we're not afraid to abandon something and try something different. And so that mindset is an important part of really standing something up that looks different than what you did before. And it takes a tremendous amount of tenacity and true belief. There were some hard moments, particularly in that first year, right? There were people who were on board with a change, and it was hard, and that was scary, and people get a little shaky. There were folks who were like, "I don't believe this is going to work," and you had to kind of be tenacious through that as well. And ultimately, we have a tremendous amount of buy-in from partners who were at the table the first day to partners who've come to the table over the years, and who overwhelmingly believe we're confident that for us, for this campus, this is a model that has worked really, really well for us, and a process that I think has made us a better set of partners in serving our students. And so, with that I will just say, we're really, really, I'm happy to answer a couple questions with these last couple minutes. We talk with tons of campuses, and so very happy to get on the phone with campuses. We also have lots of campuses who come to visit us. And so one of the things we're playing with this summer is just inviting a whole collection of folks, anyone who's interested, to come on down to Blacksburg for a day and see this a little bit more in depth as well. So, let me know if you're interested in that, and we're going to invite a bunch of people down who might be interested just to see us even a little bit more in person. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share about the program.
Oh, Rebecca, that was fantastic. I found myself nodding and smiling, especially when you were talking about lessons learned. We do have two questions. I'm going to start with the second one. Is if you could share an email address
Yes,
that to request a position description that was
please.
requested. Um,
Absolutely.
and then from back about a third of the way in,
Mhm.
how do you differentiate the three content areas in the RA hiring/selection process? Is it a
Great.
different process entirely? Questions aimed at discovering where the strengths are, etc.
Yeah, great question. So I'll get the second one, and then we'll make sure we get. Maybe I'll cover the first one first, which is my email address. I'm sorry I didn't put it on there. rcaldwell@vt.edu, and so feel free to send me anything, and I'm very happy to. If you'll send me a note, I'm happy to send you all the PDs that are associated with the department. In terms of, I think all of us know that selecting student leaders slash RA figures is complex, and we just complicated it to the all-time max. So students do apply for the different positions, and so we do it in one large process. And so when the applications come out, the students can apply for one, two, or three of the roles, and then if based on if they advance in the process to the point of in-person interviews, then they do get kind of different questions in the interview based on the position they are most interested in. We do again ask them to prioritize, which position are you the most interested in? And then based on not only kind of their what they tell us in the interview, but also kind of how they've been engaged, it might help us match folks up as well. So when someone's a hireable candidate, we do our absolute best to match them to the position that they've expressed the most interest in. And some people do only apply for one. Some people apply for all three. When it comes to placing student leaders, we not only have the three positions, but we have the 5 districts, and then we also, of course, have 25 living learning programs as well. And so it is a puzzle of all puzzles. But yes, they very specifically do indicate which of the three positions they were interested in when they apply, and they do answer different questions if they come through in-person interviews to get a little bit more of a feel about if that position is the best fit for them.
Great.
Yeah,
All right. We've had one additional question in the
great.
chat of how does this model handle community councils or RHA?
Oh, great question. We set it down actually. So our RHA had been on its last legs for a long time, and so we worked in partnership with our student government association to go ahead and to instead create a series of dedicated seats in student government that are specifically designed to be from the residential districts and kind of have the idea that they serve the residential district, and then have had a little bit of some working subgroups in our student government association that kind of have relationships with myself and the other residential departments in order to kind of express their concerns. And so our residential colleges, we have 4 kind of active residential colleges, and they do still have kind of, in essence, kind of community councils, but the majority of our residence halls do not have hall government or a functional RHA. And that the nails were almost all in the coffin before that started, before the RWB model started. And so we just decided to conceptualize representation differently as the model kicked off. And that's worked pretty well for us.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to switch over to a one last closing slide as we take any last minute questions, and hopefully everyone is seeing, rather than my email, the screen of our upcoming events at ACUHO-I. It is a busy time of year for everyone, but we hope you can take some additional time as you did today, and do what I consider as a part of self-care, which is professional development. So we have another webinar on Monday on AI, everybody's favorite topic, but how you can strategically use it in your role in housing. We have 3 symposia coming up this spring. March 25th is our one symposium. April 8th is our live-in symposium. And April 22nd is our small college and university symposium. All a great bang for your buck, especially if you get the team pass, which also allows you to discuss the content with your colleagues. In person, we have, I think we're down to less than a handful of slots for our Mid-Level Leadership Institute in Las Vegas. And then our big event, Campus Home Live. I hope to see all of you in Orlando later in June. So with that, I can't thank you, Rebecca, enough for sharing your time, your talent, this incredible program. For those that registered, you will all get a copy of the PowerPoint, and that last slide was that date for a potential on-campus visit. So with that, go forth, enjoy what for many of us will be a beautiful spring weekend full of basketball and hopefully some time outdoors. So take care, everyone. Thank you.